Steve Andreas, Six Blind Elephants, Volume 2. Not truth, not certainty, these I forswore in my novitate, as young men called to holy orders must abjure the world. If, then, this only I assert, and my successes are but pretty chains linking twin doubts, for it is vain to ask if what I postulate be justified, or what I prove possess the stamp of fact. Yet bridges stand, and men no longer crawl into dimensions, and such triumphs stem in no small measure from the power this game played with the trees attenuated shades of things has over their originals. How frail the wand, but how profound the spell. Clarence R. Whale, Jr., mathematician. Okay. Many ideas grow better when transplanted into another mind than in the one where they sprung up. Oliver Wendell Holmes. Many ideas grow better when transplanted into another mind than in the one where they sprung up. Acknowledgements. 100 times every day I remind myself that my inner and outer life depend on the labors of other people, living and dead, and that I must exert myself in order to give in the same measure as I have received and am still receiving. Albert Einstein. Charles Faulkner helped immersively in developing much of the understandings included in this book. As a colleague in discussions over the last 20 years, through co-presenting an early research seminar with me in which many of the fundamental concepts presented here were first explored and developed, by suggesting related reading, and finally as editor and critic of several drafts of the manuscript, including the near final one. On several occasions he has pointed out errors that would have made me look like a complete fool. Without his repeated prodding, support, and valuable suggestions, this book might still be vaporware, existing only in the diaphanous world of the possible but not yet. Richard Bandler and John Grinder, the original developers of neuro-linguistic programming, taught me many of the distinctions and methods of modeling and understanding people's thinking and behavior that I have used for the last 28 years, and in developing the material in this book. Wilson Van Dusen, the only mystic I ever wanted to spend time with, whose living example over a period of some 40 years taught me much about acceptance and how to gently walk in someone else's experience with curiosity, seeking understanding unbiased by any personal agenda or outcome. Bruce Horn, One of the designers of the first Macintosh computer, colleague and friend for many years, offered many suggestions and made sure that what I was thinking fit with his deep and broad knowledge of mathematics, computer architecture, and programming. J. Haley and Paul Watzlawick have provided me with a rich smorgasbord of ideas and examples in their many books and workshop presentations for a period of over 40 years. Much of this book builds on their work, while sometimes developing it further and modifying parts of it. George Lakoff, whose wonderful book Woman, Fire, and Dangerous Things, What Categories Reveal About the Mind, I only discovered when the preliminary manuscript of this book was nearly complete. As a result, my understanding of categories was deepened and broadened, and I had to rewrite and expand several sections of the manuscript. My principal focus is the practical uses of categorization and recategorization in resolving human problems, rather than Lakoff's fine-grained detail of how language reveals our use of categories. I also have a different starting point, the practical processes that can be used in therapy and personal change, rather than academic linguistics. I believe that this book is both consistent with and complementary to Lakoff's work. If at any point I seem to be contradicting Lakoff, please assume that he is correct and that I have either misunderstood or expressed my understanding poorly. Finally, my thanks go to many other colleagues and friends who took the time to read the manuscript and offer ways to improve the content and its presentation. Thanks especially to participants in training seminars over the last 20 years for their questions, comments, challenges, examples, and many other contributions to my learning. Their varied responses invited me to continually make better distinctions and develop better ways of understanding them, organizing them, and presenting them. You know who you are. My thanks to you all. None of us is as smart as all of us. Japanese proverb. Yeah, I remember it from the first part. Introduction. The great end of life is not knowledge, but action. Francis Bacon. The great end of life is not knowledge, but action. Okay. This book presupposes that you have read Volume 1 of Six Blind Elephants, which explores the fundamental properties and functioning of scope and category, processes that exist in all our thinking. A scope is the extent of what we attend to in all our senses and our internal images, remembered or forecasts, of sensory-based experience. Then we select and collect a group of scopes into what is called a basic level category, according to some criteria, in order to organize and simplify our experience. We also subdivide these basic level categories into more specific categories and group them into more general categories, creating logical levels of understanding. One of the hallmarks of human intelligence and the basis of all its successes in understanding and modifying our world. Scope and category also interact in a number of different ways. A change in scope often changes how we categorize it, and change in categorization always changes the scope that we attend to. Categories of events create meaning and significance in conjunction with context, which is one example of larger scope. Our values are categories of what is important to us, interacting in a dynamic hierarchy, in contrast to a fixed hierarchy, guiding our attention in satisfying our many different needs. The category shelter protects us from the elements, while the category food nourishes us. If we got these categories mixed up, we would try to eat our homes and find shelter under food, neither of which would work very well. These processes are mostly unconscious, and we usually act as if the result of these processes are truth or reality, rather than the somewhat arbitrary construction that it is. In most of our lives, it works very well to ignore these processes and assume that the world of experience that they create for us is real. However, sometimes we are led into understandings that are frustrating and painful, and from which we can find no escape. At those times, we desperately need to understand how our processes of understanding has led us astray, or into unpleasant or painful dead ends. Without that understanding, we are stuck, and no matter how hard we struggle, we will be captives of our own misunderstanding. In Volume 1, we explored how we can change the scope of what we attend to, and how we categorize it in a variety of different ways in order to change our experience. This volume applies the fundamental understandings developed in Volume 1 to a number of interesting problems that commonly occur in human communication and misunderstanding, beginning by examining implication, a way of saying something without actually saying it. Implication relies on categories of which we are usually only dimly aware, and it can be used in both positive and negative ways. Verbal implication is based on negation. Verbal implication is based on negation, a unique and fundamental skill in both human thinking and mathematics, yet one that has dangerous pitfalls for the unwary. Judgment splits the world into two halves, good and bad, a skill that is useful in life or death emergencies, but which can cause enormous and pervasive suffering in everyday life. Nonverbal or contextual implication utilizes the ways that we unconsciously categorize and respond to things and events around us. Nonverbal or contextual implication utilizes the ways that we unconsciously categorize and respond to things and events around us. We divide our experience into different modes of operating. Basic attitudes like having to, wanting to, and choosing to, that are useful in categorizing our activities, but which can also become traps that limit us and cause unhappiness. Talking about ourselves or understandings or our relationship creates self-reference. Another uniquely useful human skill that can also cause confusion and difficulty. Self-contradiction creates a puzzling situation in which we simultaneously must and can't do something. An impossible situation unless it is recognized. Paradox, which has puzzled thinkers for thousands of years, is created by a combination of self-reference, negation, and a universal statement in which must and can't oscillate endlessly. Although paradox often traps people in quandaries, it can also be used to free them, particularly when they have too much certainty about their categories. Since our categories are always uncertain, thinking that they are certain will keep us from even considering changing them. A double bind, like implication and paradox, can either create a horrible and punishing trap, or can release someone from a trap that they are already in. Metaphor is a unique way of understanding and communicating that has been used since before the dawn of civilization. Metaphor is one of the subtlest and most powerful ways of communicating, but like all our capabilities and skills, it can be used either to poison us or nourish us, enslave us or liberate us. Finally, I present a complete verbatim transcript of a client session, Reaching Forgiveness, that illustrates many of the patterns of change in scope and categorizations that we explore in these two volumes. With understanding of all these different processes and the choices and options that they offer us, we can use them wisely and carefully to enhance our lives and the lives of those around us. Without that knowledge, we are powerless, wandering about in a dark labyrinth. Steve Andreas, March 2006. There is nothing quite so practical as a good theory. Albert Einstein. Chapter 1. Implication. Saying without saying. When can couple therapy be terminated? When the husband says to the wife, "This coffee is terrible," and they both know that he is talking about the coffee. Paul Watzlawick. When can couple therapy be terminated? When the husband says to the wife, "This coffee is terrible," and they both know that he is talking about the coffin. Paul Watzlawick. Implication is one of the most common ways that we unconsciously make meaning when we communicate. A speaker's words imply something that the listener infers. My wife says that she is cold, implying that she would like to be warm, and I infer that she would like me to turn up the heat. I say that I didn't hear about what our son did today, and she infers that I would like to know, so she tells me. If you examine your ordinary daily communications, you will find that implication is usually far more common than direct and explicit communications like "Turn up the heat, please," or "What did Mark do today?" Implication is a result of attending to the more general significance of meaning of a particular scope of communication, action, scene, or event, categorizing it in some way. In a good relationship, thinking beyond what someone says to what else they might mean or want is a sign of respect, consideration, and caring. I hear my wife say that she is cold. I put myself in her position and think, I'll bet she'd like to be warmer. I'll turn up the heat. Using other position in this way is the basis for empathy and compassion. Attending to others' needs and wants in addition to my own. Compassion and empathy is a fundamental component of any good relationship, and it is also a basis of any civilized society that treats all its members as human beings. Unfortunately, the ambiguity of implication is also an opportunity for misunderstanding, confusion, or worse, separating people, rather than bringing them together. For instance, if someone gives you a present, what is the implication? Is it a spontaneous and freely given sign of appreciation, no strings attached? Or is it a dutiful satisfaction of a past obligation, or an atonement for some guilt, real or imagined? Does this gift imply a sexual invitation? Does this gift imply a sexual invitation, create a future obligation, or something else altogether? Years ago, when a friend of mine baked some bread, and gave a loaf to her psychoanalyst, the implications of that gift were explored for the next 6 months at $100 an hour. As far as she was concerned, it was simply an appreciative gift and not a symbolic communication that she wanted to mother him because he was immature, or that he was loafing, or that he was doing a crummy job. In a good relationship, even these kinds of possible implication can be expressed and explored openly and playfully, with no one taking it very seriously, an opportunity for creativity and interaction. But if a relationship is strained, tense, or defensive, people have a tendency to search for negative and harmful implications that can be very damaging to the relationship. The more threatened and defensive someone is, the more they are likely to be vigilant for any possible negative implication. As an old joke goes, one person says, "Good morning," and the other says to himself, I wonder what he meant by that." When someone frequently attends to negative implications in a wide range of contexts, we describe them as paranoid. It seems likely that someone would learn to do this in a context in which family members used a lot of negative implication instead of direct communication about important issues, with severe punishment for not making the correct inferences. For instance, by the time a couple decides to come in for therapy, they have already been arguing and fighting for some time, and are unhappy, confused, fearful, and have at least thought about separating. This creates a backlog of implication for the unwary therapist. Whether the couple realizes it or not, the most important unspoken question in both their minds is, are you going to be on my side or his, hers? Their next question is almost certain to be, are you for marriage or separation? Another either-or categorization. As a result, both will be exceptionally vigilant, noticing the slightest word or action that might imply an answer to either of these questions. Before anything useful can happen, the therapist has to respond to these either-or assumptions and embrace both sides of them by explicitly and hopefully congruently assuring the couple that he or she is on both their sides and neither for or against marriage or divorce. That is their decision to make. The therapist's job is to clarify their needs and their communication, to help them reach a decision that fits best for both of them. Of course, sometimes it is very important to attend to the implication of an event, because even a very small event may have a very important meaning. A friend of mine found books of matches around the house from places he had never been. This puzzled him, but he didn't think too much about it. About a year later, he found out that his wife had been having a series of affairs, bringing back matches from different bars and restaurants where she had met her lovers. However, there might have been some other completely innocent meaning of the strange matches. They could have been a casual gift from a friend who has clearing out her kitchen cupboard. "Here, can you use these matches?" In that case, if my friend had thought of threatening implications, that would have been an imaginary meaning that would have caused unnecessary unhappiness. Often we find implications on our own, but sometimes others invite us to do it. It is interesting that you would say that is a vague implication that the speaker is putting the statement into a larger category, and the listener is likely to search for what it is. Depending on the facial expression and tone of voice, this ambiguous communication could be a criticism, a compliment, an accusation, a sexual invitation, or any number of other possible communications. The absence of communication, particularly when someone is expecting it, is even more ambiguous and fertile in possible implications. What does that silence mean? So, while implication can be a very graceful and respectful way to communicate, it can also be a source of serious miscommunication, disguising accusation, blame, and all sorts of other destructive messages. Like all patterns of communication, implication can be used in negative ways or positive ways. When we understand how they work, we can avoid a lot of misunderstanding and unhappiness. There are several kinds of implication, and each is somewhat different. I want to begin with a fundamental kind of implication that provides a basis for exploring how other kinds of implication work. Model of world. Whenever someone is stuck in a problem or limitation, they are categorizing it in a way that isn't useful in resolving it. However, they are usually also categorizing this categorization at a higher logical level as the only way to do it. The problem is that she wants to control me, and that's a fact. Implication is particularly useful in graceful and gently making a distinction between how the world is, which we can never know directly or completely, and how we perceive it, think about it, understand it, or interpret it. What has often been called the map/territory distinction. Our experience is always only a map of the territory, although we can sometimes come very close to it. We can never completely know the territory itself. Different communication patterns that elicit a distinction between our map and the reality that the map describes have been grouped together under the name model of the world. Different communication patterns that elicit a distinction between our map and the reality that the map describes have been grouped together under the name model of the world. I want you to have an experience of these different patterns before discussing them. Think of some specific problem or limitation you have, or imagine being someone else that you know who has a specific limitation, and imagine expressing this problem to someone else in a brief statement. For example, My husband never thinks about the social consequences of what he says. Then notice your internal experience of this sentence. 3 periods indicate a pause.